Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha Hunter, and I work in the Policy Office at the National Science Foundation. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to the Spring 2021 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. And I am now pleased to present this session, which will cover the Director for Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences. This session will be presented by Dr. Robert O'Connor.
Hi, my name is Bob O'Connor. I'm the Program Director for Decision Risk and Management Sciences, which is in the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate. What I'm going to be talking about is research opportunities in the social sciences, submission procedures, some of the things that are specific to SBE, which is the abbreviation for Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences. And I'll talk more about things like separating awards from distinctions, what will get you funded, which I suspect many of you care about more than anything else that I could possibly say. Okay, the foundation, you guys probably know this. It's a very flat organization. There are 7 research directorates: bio, science, engineering, geo, math, and physical sciences, SBE, and education. It's so flat. My boss's 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 boss is Joe Biden. For SBE, there are 3 divisions: social and economic sciences, behavioral and cognitive sciences, and a different division that's different from anything else at the National Science Foundation. That is the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics. NCSES does not fund research. What it does is produce reports on science and engineering: how many PhDs, how much money is being spent in R&D, and where. So the 2 divisions that actually fund research are SES and BCS. Why do we have those divisions rather than just one division? Well, a long time ago, we thought that we'd get more money if we split into 2. Okay, next is, why do you want funding from us? Well, we are great place for money. We will fund curiosity-driven research. We pay full overhead. In fact, it is illegal for us to pay less, and it is illegal for us to accept a match from your school. This is why your dean loves it when you get money from the National Science Foundation. If you're going to do $150,000 research, typically the check from NSF would be $150,000 if your indirect cost rate is 50%, and many schools are. This makes your administration very, very happy with you. Okay. We provide summer salary support up to 2 months for tenure track faculty or tenured faculty at research institutions. And we use a grant mechanism. Why this matters is it's not a contract for the vast amount of what we fund. It's a grant, which means that essentially you get the money and we leave you alone. Why we are great money is that we want you to spend your time doing the research, giving papers at professional meetings, having publications in the top journals and any journals, getting the stuff out to people who could actually use it rather than writing reports to us. When I make an award, that principal investigator owes me once a year an annual report, which is fairly brief. It's saying, what did we do? How does it match up with the proposal? No, you didn't get around to doing half of the experiments because of something. Well, you'll do it next year. That's it. Okay, so we are great money. What does SBE do? Well, our slogan is your life, our work, SBE. As you can read, we fund research about people and society. We fund research that helps to inform decisions to improve health, prosperity, welfare, and defense. That's in the charter for the National Science Foundation. So we explore human behavior and organizations. We look at how what's going on affect people's lives. So that is SBE, your life or work, SBE. Okay, here's the organization chart. As I said earlier, it's flat. Our director is Skip Lupia. The deputy director is Kelly Craig Henderson. SBE's model, by the way, is that the assistant directors are rotators. They're here for about 4 years, then they leave. The deputy assistant is a lifer. Kelly will stay. Hopefully she stays forever because she's good. But it's not a temporary appointment. So you get the institutional memory and the person who knows what's been done in the past in Kelly, and you get the new ideas coming in from an outsider. Skip is a political scientist at the University of Michigan. Okay, the two directorates you care about for us are BCS and SES. Mark Sebranks also is a rotator, and his deputy, Antoinette Winkler-Prince, is a permanent employee. And before you have a list of programs in BCS. My division, Social and Economic Sciences, Danny Goroff is the deputy director. Alan Tompkins is his assistant. Alan's the lifetime employee, and you have a list of programs there. And I'll go into a couple of these in greater details later. As I said earlier, NCSES, Mildred Rivers runs it, and they produce those reports. There also is the head office, the Office of Interdisciplinary Activities, which has a couple of programs. Where to start to figure out what's going on? Well, check the home page, go to funding. Grants.gov doesn't have anything very different from the NSF pages, so you don't need to use it unless you're using grants.gov. The awards search is a great place to learn what's going on. Now, programs have a page that describes the program, but it's very broad. The economics program says basically that econ is going to fund research that's going to give you theoretical and methodological advances in economics. It hasn't changed in over a decade. We don't change what we're, quote, looking for every year. We're looking for actually you guys to tell us where the great ideas is, rather than bureaucrats sitting in where we used to sit in Alexandria, Virginia, deciding a priori. But it helps to know what these programs has been funding. And every award, you'll find I think thousands and thousands of them on the website, and you can search by program, or you can search by key words. Like, let's say you're interested in climate change. Well, put in climate change, and you'll find that sociology has funded communication studies, microgram decision risk management sciences has funded risk-related work and risk perceptions toward climate change. The atmospheric sciences have funded, you get the point. So you can search by program, keyword, institution, you can search by all kinds of things. So you can find out what these programs really have been funding. Okay, then you can go to the PAP-G, the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. This is like 100 pages, but it tells you all the details. Your sponsored programs office has people whose business is to know this and know it well, to figure out what you can do and what you can't. Now, we fund through specific solicitations and program descriptions. A specific solicitation will say something like, okay, we're looking for research on so-and-so. Here's what you need to do to get funded. Here's the deadline, etc. Most programs in SBE do not have solicitations. They just have a page. I occasionally get emails from PIs saying they can't find the solicitation for decision risk and management sciences. And the reason is there isn't any. We just have a website where we say, these are the kinds of things we've been funding, and we encourage you to go to the awards to see what we have been funding. And later in this presentation, I'll talk a bit more about how to find out which program is likely to be the most appropriate for your work. One of the programs, let me make sure this is right, that I want to say something about in the Social and Behavioral Sciences division is entitled Accountable Institutions and Behavior. You might not surprisingly say, well, what is that? Well, it has a description as follows, which you all can read. What happened a couple of years ago, the political science program was split into two programs. A lot of people are uncomfortable with political science. At times, people have suggested that NSF would be better off without it. Well, so what we've done is to split political science into two programs. Accountable Institutions and Behavior is essentially American politics, institutions, individual and group decision-making, attitude and preference formation and expression, especially related to policy matters. Jan Lightly is a political scientist who manages that program. So that's one of the programs that used to be political science. The other one is security and preparedness. You may not like political science, but who can be against security and preparedness? So this is essentially international relations and comparative politics, very broadly related to policy and global and national security. Okay. How to get money. There's different types of ways of getting money. And here's a list, and I will go through them one by one, hopefully pretty quickly. The most of the money is in unsolicited competitions. And by unsolicited competition, I mean there's not a specific solicitation that says, hey, we're looking for research on so-and-so. These tend to have a standing, well, these almost always have a standing program like economics, sociology, cognitive psychology, social psychology, anthropology. And twice a year, there's a competition. And you need to send in your proposals by the due date, and that's it. And what, as I said before, a key is we're not looking a priori to say what we're looking for. We're looking for you, the community out there, to make a case that this particular proposal, we're going to learn something that has great intellectual merit and strong broader impacts. And I'll define those terms later. Okay, special solicitations are announced on the web. One is called Build and Broaden, which I'll talk about later. We also have rapids, eagers, careers. You do dear colleague letters, dissertations, and research coordination networks. To go through each, okay, target dates. A target date essentially is a deadline. It's called a target date because deadline has legal implications, and target dates allows us to give more time when we choose to do so, we being program officers. But there's got to be a really good reason. It can't be the dog ate my proposal, person who was supposed to send it in has the flu. It's got to be something in advance that there's a reason that makes sense. So I would consider them as deadlines. NSF elsewhere on special solicitations and everywhere else, if there's a deadline, it's a deadline. And that means the computer won't accept it after close of business time on that date. I would add, by the way, that a number of directorates and divisions within directorates have gotten rid of deadlines. They found that this reduces the number of proposals. By the way, it seems that professors need a deadline to send in a proposal, or at least some do. Anyway, for us, we do have target dates, BCS and NSF. and SES. I would check if you're sending in a proposal that these dates haven't changed. Okay, dissertations. Some SBE programs fund them, and here is the list. My program does. I love them, by the way. What they are is, well, they are dissertations, and I see, okay. And the PI is the dissertation advisor, and they're for 1 year. They will fund anything with the research except a stipend. They will pay travel costs, participant costs, special equipment. Particular programs may set a limit on the amount. My program has funded them up to like $40,000 if you're doing an fMRI, which is expensive, a national survey. I think these are, I really recommend if you're in a doctoral granting institutions and you have students in those programs to consider the doctoral dissertation research improvement awards. The hidden benefit of it is that it familiarizes the student to the National Science Foundation. One of my favorite stories, it's fairly recent, there's a young woman at Colorado State who my program funded her dissertation 4 years ago and at Stanford, and she's moved on, is an assistant professor at Colorado State. She got an award from us her first year there. Last year, she got a Rapid Award, and she's about to get another. So it's maybe we over-socialized her to the National Science Foundation. But anyway, think about it. Okay, career. Career is a special program. It runs through the individual programs in the directorate. If you are an economist and you want a career award, you submit to the economics program. Therefore, untenured faculty or comparable positions, if you're in a think tank or somewhere else, they're a single scholar. Yeah, you can get a little help, specialized help from a statistician or something, but it's not the team, it's you. Minimum of $500,000 in 5 years. You get to try this 3 times in your life. It has a deadline in July. It's no longer July 1st. I have not updated this slide. Now, different directorates make them easier to get than my directorate. For SBE, they are rare. Most programs will do 1 a year, 1.5 a year. By a half, I mean it's co-funded with a second program. And so you've got to be really among the top people of your generation to get one. Other programs, other directorates such as engineering, it's much easier. I'm not, if you're junior faculty, I'm not discouraging you from the National Science Foundation, but I'm saying if you're not really super, send in a regular proposal, not a career. I've heard some people say incorrectly, so I probably shouldn't repeat it because you'll remember the incorrect information. Well, regular proposals are for tenured faculty, career proposals are for junior faculty. No! Regular proposals are for both. We fund junior people on regular proposals all the time. I just gave you an example about 5 minutes ago. So anyway, that's the tale. All right. Oh, something else about a career I should add is that careers, it's got to be good research, but there's also a requirement that the proposal explain how the PI is going to integrate the research into the career as an educator. And it better be something other than I'm going to integrate what I learn in my classes, something that's going to get the new knowledge out there and it really relates very directly to one's view, to one's role as an educator. Okay, Rapids. My program funded 38 of these related to COVID-19 last summer. It's when data are ephemeral. You've got to collect the data now. You can't send in a regular proposal. My next target date is August 18th. If you send in a proposal to me now, you won't get funded until the end of November, early December, if then. But if you're doing research on something that the data are going to disappear, I funded a couple of rapids tied to the storm in Texas that the PI needed to collect the data now on storm recovery efforts, and those data would not be available next winter. So the data have got to be ephemeral. It's 1 year of money, $200,000 maximum. The project description is only 5 pages, and it's internal review only. That is, we don't send them out to review. If you're applying to DRMS, DRMS has 2 program officers, Claudia Gonzalez-Friejo and myself. So we will read it. I may ask somebody else in the office to read it, but probably not. And we'll either fund it or not. But you must contact the program officer first before you can submit a rapid. And you have to attach to the proposal the email from the program officer giving you permission to submit. For other proposals at NSF, you do not need permission to submit. Any American institution can submit, period, without permission. But for this, you need to ask first. The reason is folks often have had a history of just wanting to do something where the data really are not ephemeral. And it takes a lot of their time to prepare the proposal and our time to review it. So by letting us know first and describing what you want to do, we can say, yeah, that's certainly plausible, send it in. Or, sorry, that's not really a rapid. Okay. EAGRs. EAGRs are exploratory work on untested, potentially transformative ideas. It's like a rapid, too, that you've got to contact the program officer first. These are rare. The idea is to fund high-risk, high-potential payoff research. This is research. The history of EAGRs is, back in the last century, the National Science Board said, they've heard complaints that people have proposals that are brilliant, that they go to the advisory panel. The advisory panel members are so intimidated by the brilliance of the proposal so that they fear that their own careers would seem like a waste. So they recommend that the program officers turn them down, and the program officers are chicken and won't stand up to the panel and say, I'm going to fund it. So we don't fund a lot of great research. The EAGRs are a way of avoiding that. So you can just send in an 8-pager and it would be funded. My program, the last time we funded one of these was 14 years ago. The vast majority of EAGR proposals we get are ideas that can perfectly well be reviewed by my panel. And so other programs are a little more lenient, but basically, unless what you're doing is so weird that, most people would just simply write it off, you should probably forget about an EAGR. Okay. Dear colleague letters, we often announce special competitions through a Dear Colleague letter. Dear Colleagues letters are published on the NSF website. An example you can find is called Strengthening American Infrastructure. It had information on conference proposals that were due in November. It also used the EAGR mechanism to fund proof of concept stuff. We're dealing with the social science of strengthening infrastructure. These were due last December. And the management team for this picked out the eagers that they thought had a future and said, okay, guys, send in a full proposal, a full eager on January 21st, on January 2021. So why did we do this and why am I mentioning this? Well, I know you missed the due date. It's not January, but there will be additional competitions tied to strengthening American infrastructure. This is a priority for SBE management, and there'll be opportunities for all kinds of social science research tied to infrastructure. Okay, research coordination networks. There's a link to the website. The idea here is to focus groups of scholars on a theme, and you submit your proposal to a particular program, and it's 5 years of $500,000. Now, the idea here is it's not to do research, but to figure out how to do research. So it's to bring together scholars from different disciplines and different schools who might have a new way to address a particular problem. And it's sort of a series of workshops over 5 years, at the end of which this group may decide to submit a number of proposals to money to actually do research. So it's an ongoing series of workshops. Okay, I mentioned earlier a special program, and this is a special solicitation, Build and Broaden. NSF has been committed for quite some time to build and broaden the types of scholars and types of institutions that are doing good research, including social science research. The subtitle of this solicitation is Enhancing SBE Science Research and Capacity at Minority-Serving Institutions. The idea here is to support research collaborations between scholars at minority-serving institutions and scholars at other institutions. In other words, people at R1 institutions and others that are familiar with how to play research and how to get funded to work with minority institutions to help build up the research infrastructure at those institutions. You all have missed the March 5th deadline, but the reason I put this up is to give an example and tell you that there will be a Build and Broaden 3.0. We are at the stage now of learning from this solicitation of what do we need to do to make it stronger, better, and there will be a new solicitation out there. Okay. Now, if you're unclear where to submit, the first thing you need to do is to do your homework. Program officers are kind of like professors, which many of you are, in the sense that when a student comes in and has done his or her homework, you're very receptive and helpful. But when somebody comes in who hasn't done the reading and asks a question because the kid wants to smooth, you are less than amused. So with us, see what programs have been funded. If it's in response to a specific solicitation, like Build and Broaden, look at it and go to the program page, if it's like DRMS, and see what it says about the program. Okay, if it's unclear, in my case for DRMS, just send me a one-pager saying, look, this is what I want to do. And you include that often the research question. What's the likely theoretical or methodological advance if the project is funded? And then what's the literature on which you are building? Okay, so I ask you to do that rather than call me because I'm not good on my feet. I may not understand. You may not understand what I'm saying. But if I have a chance to read what you're doing and read it more than once and share it with a colleague and say, this isn't me, it seems to me I want to talk to my colleagues in geography or down in operations research and engineering. It may be better for them, and I can share it. So anyway, if you're unclear where to submit, that's what to do. I tend to get back to people usually within 24 hours. Now, how do proposal structures? Okay, this is, you guys probably already know in many cases, but it's one page. The description is 15 pages. References, yeah, there's no limit. Biographical sketches as a form now you need to fill out. You need to include a budget and a 3-page budget justification and a conflict of interest matrix. And there's a form to do that. That's it. Except you also need to list your current and pending support. You need to come up with a data management plan. For social scientists, we have gotten more demanding on these in SBE. What I mean is you've got to talk about privacy and protection of the data, but we also want to know how you plan on sharing it. And the right answer is not, I will share my data with people who call me personally, explain how they're going to use it, and beg me. We won't fund a proposal that says that's how they plan to share the data. Or if they say they will share the data 50 years after I have published my last article based on the data. So what we ask is, kind of norm is about a year after the data collection is over, or the research is over, you need to share those data. And share means place the curated data in a publicly accessible repository. ICPSR, there's a number of them psychologists use. Have we not funded a proposal because the data management plan is inadequate? No. What happens is Claudia and I will step back and say, okay, your data management plan is inadequate. We want you to send us a new one. At the minimum, you must do so-and-so. If the PI refuses, which has never happened, we won't fund it. So there's also a postdoc mentoring plan if you have a postdoc, and reviewer suggestions. This is optional, but my Uncle Bob on this is, yeah, do it if you possibly can. Give us 5 or 6 or 7 names of people with whom you do not have a COI, who you think have the background to be appropriate reviewers for the proposal. Now, you may be thinking, why would I do that? Because obviously, this guy would discount any positive review of somebody I recommended. Au contraire. It's the quality of the review. It's not, this person's wonderful, this person's a star, you got to fund anything this person does. That doesn't show me that the person actually read the proposal. Instead, a proposal that explains why it's good, why it's a real advance, or conversely, why it's pretty good, but there's some questions and some things that should be clarified or weaknesses. That's a good review. And by the way, I've gotten some of the nastiest reviews from reviewers suggested by the PI. I think I've understood like never before that jealousy may be more prevalent in our society than I had thought. Anyway, okay, it is voluntary, but it's helpful. Usually, I'll assign a couple of those reviews of the 6 people I try to assign it to. More on that later. Okay, the process of proposing. You send it to us. What I'll do, and Claudia will do, well, first off, I'll give half of them to her and try to give her more, but she doesn't like that and will send me some back. And I'll ask, is this appropriate for DRMS or somewhere else? and I'll ask, is it appropriate for a co-review, whether or not you requested it? So if it has a component that also, for example, might advance operations research or economics, I would ask program officers in those programs if they'd be interested in co-reviewing. Co-reviewing is not double jeopardy, it's double opportunity. Sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. If you think that you're making a significant contribution to a second field, the application does give you an opportunity to let us know that. So co-reviewing makes it actually more likely that you're going to get funded because every program has a set budget. I have my budget, and it includes standard programs, careers, eagers, rapids, you name it. So if I have a proposal that's pretty good, but I have others in the same category, and I can get another program to pick up half the cost, that's going to make it more likely that that program will get funded. So that's co-review. If you have minor technical problems when I get it, we will, or the staff assistant who does compliance checking will ask you to fix it. Then what I'll do is send it out to 6 people. I'll send them an email message saying, hey, do you want to review this? As soon as I get 4 people who've agreed, I'll stop. And then with those 4 reviews, if it doesn't get a certain percentage that are on the more positive side, the proposal will die right then. It will get triaged. Some other programs do it this way, others don't. They all use co-reviews. Those who get past that initial hurdle, I'll ask 2 members of my advisory panel to review it. The advisory panel is composed of senior scholars. It's a 2-year term, 4 competitions, senior people. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience for my program, DRMS. That is, there's lots of great scholars in my fields, and the advisory panel should not just be rotating the same old friends of Bob. So they then, we have a meeting. We resumed it a couple of weeks ago, and they'll put it in categories: highly recommend, highly competitive, competitive plus, competitive minus, not competitive but encouraged. We use that for only stuff that looks like, Jesus, they can only figure out how to do one part of it. It would be just wonderful. And then decline the fund. We do the same thing for dissertations. They're reviewed by the same panel. That's it on how it works. In my 20 years at the National Science Foundation, I've never had a funding recommendation overturned, either fund or not fund. So if you're not funded, blame your program officer, because that's the real decision point. Now, if I got weird, I have no doubt that my management would say, Bob, please explain why you want to fund this or why you don't want to fund this. But so far, it hasn't happened. Okay. So reviewers, how do I get them? How do they come from? My own knowledge of the field. I'm the risk guy in decision risk and management sciences. I'm a political scientist who's done risk work. Claudia is a psychologist. She's the judgment and decision-making person. She also knows the game theoretic stuff, and I know the disaster stuff. Most programs have 2 PIs, and I have 2 program officers. Program officer and officer director is the same thing. One of us is permanent. The other tends to be a rotator. That's somebody who comes in from a couple of years for a couple of years. Often the permanent bureaucrat was a rotator. I began as a rotator from Penn State, and now I'm permanent. Okay. So I get them from references listed in the proposal, Google, of course, community of science and other databases, reviewer recommendations, and investigators' suggestions. That is, reviewer recommendations is sometimes I'll get a review early and that reviewer will recommend, but that's not a common one. Usually the others are common. So, okay, proposals need that if they involve collecting data from humans, you need approval from your institutional review board. Do you need IRB approval if you are using a data set like the National Election Studies? The answer is no. That's already, you're not collecting the data, you're using somebody else's data. But any type of new data collection, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, anything where you're contacting humans, you need IRB approval. By the way, IRB approval may be from your IRB board saying, we approve of this concept. We do not necessarily approve of the research instrument because it doesn't exist yet. But the PI needs to submit that research instrument once it is available after the PI has done the preliminary qualitative work. IRB approval is not needed at the time of submission. And in fact, normally I would urge you not to do it. Most proposals are not funded. So do you really want to take your time doing the approval request and taking it to your board when it's not likely to be funded? An exception, by the way, is especially in the spring, if your work is doing something that's really unusual and sounds a little bit that it might be a little dangerous. For that, you should probably give your IRB board extra time. And I said in the spring because we work on a fiscal year that ends on September 30th, and we spend all our money by that date. My budget disappears on October 1st. So if I haven't funded you at that time, unless I specifically decided to hold it over, your money needs to be moved in the year that you're submitting your proposal. Okay. Funding decisions, as I was saying, the program officer does it. Basically, we then go through an approval process. Feedback goes to the PI. You get all the reviews. And in my years here, I think there have only been 3 times when I've redacted part of a review. And they were all times where the reviewer had identified himself. And I can say that because they were all males. This person failed to cite my book, so-and-so. The process is anonymous one-sided. The PI knows who the proposer is, but that's it. The proposer doesn't know who wrote the review. We notify you as quickly as we can, and we then often have a scope of work and budget discussions. We can do one of 3 things with a budget for a proposal where we want to fund it because the science is good. One thing, and we've done this occasionally, but don't count on it, is ask that the PI increase the budget. We think, this is great, but they really need an econometrician on some of this, and they don't have one. So we need to let them know that we're willing to pay the additional support for an econometrician. That's extremely rare. Often, very common, we will fund the budget as requested. There's no such a thing as an automatic 10% reduction. If we did that, all you guys would do is just add 10% to your budget. You're not stupid. So often we fund what is, if it looks reasonable, and I'll talk about this in a moment, we'll fund it. And the third is we'll suggest that you need to reduce the budget, that perhaps a place to look is that Barbados conference when your research is on the Amish. Okay. The two funding criteria, intellectual merit and broader impacts, they're not necessarily equal, to be honest. I've seen research funded with high intellectual merit where the broader impacts seem to be non-existent or minimal, or at least not explained well. But if you're not pushing the science, but I mean the social science, you will not get funded. So most successful proposals spend much more time dealing with the intellectual merit and broader impacts. Also, frankly, for we in the social sciences, often the broader impacts are obvious. One DRMS award, basically, I'll mention is that of trying to understand more about the decision to shoot and the people involved, and looks at the process and the type of information would change that and so. And it's a simulation, and the subjects for the study are police officers. So the research is trying to figure out ways of reducing unfortunate shootings. You don't need to spend 5 pages on explaining the broader impacts of that research. Okay, we fund basic research. Intellectual merit means increasing knowledge through developing and examining basic theories or methods. Now, does this mean that your work needs to be irrelevant to addressing contemporary issues or problems? No. In fact, intellectual broader impacts is the exact opposite. My tale on this, or my example is, let's say you came to NSF with a proposal to cure cancer. And what would happen is, well, first off, we don't do it. That's NIH. But let's say we did. We'd say, this is applied. This is just applying some stuff. It's applied. Where's the intellectual merit? We won't fund it. Now, if you came up with the same work, and what the work is the traditional theory of how cells divide in radical ways is so-and-so, and you're questioning that theory by having a new method to suggest that there's another way that cells divide, of understanding this process, and it might be stopped by doing so-and-so, and your research involves zapping mice, doing some epidemiological stuff, blah, 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 and the broader impacts are that it would cure cancer, that's fundable. So the basic research question there is a theoretical advance in how we understand how cells divide, and the broader impacts are it would cure cancer. Great research. So talk about that. Again, I'm not discouraging you from proposals that address contemporary issues, quite the opposite, or dilemmas. We need more of that, but we fund basic research. Broader impacts, essentially, as I was saying, the potential to benefit society. Now, it's not entirely orthogonal to intellectual merits. That is, if the intellectual merit is weak, that is because the research design, reviewers, and we look and say, look, you'll never be able to make any kinds of inferences because you've got a confounding issue and so. It may have low broader impacts because the new knowledge, significant new knowledge, is unlikely to emerge. Okay? And there is a recent dear colleague letter on broader impacts for the social sciences that I urge you to take a look at. It was just out, I think, this month or last month, and it clarifies what would, some of the things you might look at clarifying in your proposals. Okay, budget tips. Okay, reasonable. Lowballing, where you're going to look at it and say, wait a second, they can't do that for that amount of money, is not helpful. It's going to hurt. If these people don't know what they're doing, they can't do a national survey, so for $200. Okay. You need to explain why you need it. And sometimes there are program guidelines. You can check with the program officer, but eligible costs are personnel, equipment, travel, We pay, as I said earlier, indirect costs. Sub-awards are also payable. You can have. We also have collaborations. I should probably say something about that. Collaboration is two institutions or more. One proposal coming from school A is the primary one. The one coming from school B is the same except for the budget. Everything else is the same. So it's two schools, the same project description, but what's different, it's a separate budget for work done on that school. Okay. And it's very easy to do. So it's not more difficult for us than review together. We either fund both of them or neither. All right. Okay, myths about NSF. We only fund elite graduate institutions. You've got to be a well-known, I say famous in quotes because people argue that famous academic is an oxymoron. Once declined, you're always likely to be declined, that we have some kind of loser list. Totally untrue. In fact, one thing is I cannot divulge the name of anybody who submitted a proposal that was declined. That's private information. Awards are public, as you mentioned earlier, they are listed. But all I can tell you is that one of the reasons the names you've heard of are Nobel Prize winners, the Paul Slovics, they're relentless. They apply a lot. They get a negative review and they'll deal with it and either resubmit addressing the issues or say that, boy, I really can't deal with this and go on to something else. Okay, we only fund normal science. Nah. The word transformative is used a lot. That's hard to do. I may have had one transformative proposal in 20 years, but something that's out of the ordinary, that really helps you to get funded. And advisory committees make funding decisions. No, they don't. There's a very high correlation between my committee and what they say we should fund, especially in that highest category, because they've got good reasons. But the program officers really end up making the final decisions. We're not NIH. Okay, reasons for declines. The Trust Me proposal is a common one. That is, the PI has a good idea. It's an important topic. The new information would be useful. So the potential broader impacts are great. The PI says, look at me. I've won a Nobel Prize, or I've got this great resume. And so give me the money and I'll figure out what I'm going to do with it to address this significant issue. That's a trust me. You can do better than that. The more detail you give, saying how you're going to measure things, how you're going to do it, when you're going to do what, it's a research design effectively. Its first is what's the research questions, what's the previous research, and then what are you doing? Previous research, by the way, can be done very quickly. You can say there are three basic approaches to this. There's the X approach, for example, Jones 1963, Smith 1998. The Y approach, so and so and so and so. These approaches all have in common X. None has looked at the so-and-so, which we plan to do. Okay, the too ambitious one is you look at it, so expertise gaps, yeah. This is my favorite is engineers doing surveys. There's a science to it. There's huge literature. So you should have somebody on your team with that type of degree or experience, so publication, so you can make a case, we should have somebody who knows how to do a survey. One of the strange things I've learned in the NSF building is that you will not have social scientists doing structural engineering because we know that we're not qualified to do it. You do have people in some other sciences thinking they can do social science. And indeed, they can do social science. They can do social science poorly, but anyway, okay. Make sure you cover what you need. You're not asking for enough money. It's too ambitious. In a period of years, you want to do what with so many resources? You're going to interview every living CEO of a Fortune 500 company and do, come on, it's might not work. Incremental contribution is, yeah, it's okay, but it's a slight, addition to a well understood theory. And bad luck sometimes. You have a nice proposal on an interesting topic, but just that round, there are two others that are really incredibly good. Bad luck. When I used to do face-to-face outreach, one question I get asked, which is not about NSF and what we can do, is how do you put together an interdisciplinary team? Since one of the things NSF is doing so much more now is interdisciplinary competitions. So how do you, at a school, put together a team? Well, I had experience with this at Penn State, both very successful and not so successful. My lessons from the successful one is you've got to decide you really want to do it, and you need to commit for the long haul. It's not one proposal. You've got to be into it to work on this for a while. So be wary if you're untenured, because you don't want to have all kinds of publications coming out 5 years later, and also ones that your particular discipline isn't impressed with. So, it takes time. You've got to really want to do it. Another thing is leadership, which is crucial. A proposal that looks like the engineers wrote 3 pages, some geographer wrote 3, a couple of pages by an economist, and then there's a political scientist. It looks like it had different authors and so. That isn't going to read very well, and probably intellectually isn't going to be all that coherent, have great coherence anyway. So you need a leader who's willing to listen, but then decides. By the way, the long haul reason, one thing is that the first proposal generally doesn't work. One of the reasons is the team has some dysfunctional people on it. You may have learned that Paul may be a brilliant economist, but doesn't play well with others. He's either Paul's way or no way, and anyway. So next time when you revise it, you replace Paul. Okay. And I also found that having meetings that looked at intellectual as well as task-related purposes really helped. We had a grant from NSF dealing with climate change, and it really helped the social sciences to actually get down and talk intellectually what the hell neural nets are and what they mean for climate modeling, etc. It helped me do my job as a social scientist on that team better. So, okay, this is a quickie. A lot of social scientists have NIH experience, especially those of you on the psychological persuasion. Well, NSF awards tend to be smaller. We don't tend to support quite the entourage as NIH does. We're more open to risky, exploratory, paradigm challenging work. That is, I was on one panel at NSF with heavily psychologists, and the panel, some panel members from NIH backgrounds was saying, they need more pilot data. And I'm thinking, if these guys need more pilot data, you shouldn't fund it because you already know the results. Okay. We also stress basic research, where NIH is more willing to throw together, 6 variables where they have no idea what the theory is, but maybe it relates to something. Okay, we don't have a scoring system or a percentile system. You can go in to the panel meeting with 3 excellence, a very good, and a fair, and it comes out of the panel with a decline to fund, not competitive recommendation. What happened is the fair, nobody else thought of that, and that's a fatal flaw. So that's how it works with us. we use revision encouragement loosely in some programs. That's not as much, but it's important to know it's not like a journal. My experience with journals when I still have some, was that every single time I got to revise and resubmit, the piece was eventually published in that journal. So what happened, I looked at the suggestions, I'd come back, I'd write a letter to the editor explaining how I was addressing all of those concerns, and voila, I had a publication. With us, legally, there's no such a thing as a revision. Everything's new. You have to compete against new proposals. So if you get some positive comments, you need to sit down and think, can I address these concerns, or is this a fatal flaw that's likely to come up again? If you think, it's important to research, I want to do it, and I just need to do a better job explaining this. Okay. Advice. Uncle Bob time. Okay. Learn to love rejection. The clearest way to this isn't in favor of some sadism and approach with the National Science Foundation. No, it's that if you don't apply, you'll never get paid. You'll never get an award. The point is to number of home runs, not the batting average. So you need to apply. You also team up. The days of the brilliant individual scholar getting funded that's a lot harder. Now, careers, they're individual scholar, but it's almost team. If you have a specific question, email your program officer, especially as I said earlier, if you're not sure which program. But if you've done your homework and something's vague, in my case, send me an email. Do not call me because you want to smooth, you want to talk about your life history, you want to talk about your, why you decided to become a social scientist. I know I'm sounding sarcastic here, but we are understaffed. The taxpayers are not cheated by the hours that I put in and most of my colleagues put in. Quality of judgment may be a different question, of course, but so it's but when something's not clear and you have a question, by all means, email and I will get back quickly. And again, as I said earlier, I really wish more people did dissertations. And I'm almost done here. It's useful to submit even if declined. Yeah, oftentimes proposals are funded on the second time or third time even. Although we try very hard not to string people along, and I'm brutally honest with folks, the nastiest thing I can do is to encourage people on a proposal that I know is going nowhere. That just wastes your time. I won't do it. So it's sometimes you send in, you will learn about other funding sources. I occasionally say, look, I know there's a program over in EPA. This was once when EPA had money to support research. It may again. But it forces, sending in a proposal, it forces you to think. We all know great, I used to refer to as happy hour at the bar sociologists who would have these great theories but never do anything about it. Well, I no longer say that because people don't go to bars anymore. But the point's the same. Putting together a proposal will force you to think, okay, how would you actually study this? And if you think it's so hot, well, put the electrons where your mouth is and send us a proposal. You'll build relationships with colleagues, and again, colleagues at the same school or other schools, sub-awards and consultant relationships and collaborations are very easy. And also you get the feedback, you get the reviews from experts as well as a panel summary. So even if you're not funded immediately, it's It's in most cases worth your time. That's it. Questions? Give me a call. I'm not in the building, but I'll get the message. But better still is email, ro'connor@nsf.gov. That's it.
Thank you so much for that, Bob. We are now ready for your questions. I know you all have been sending them in and we've been answering them all along. But if you have more, and we have lots of time for more, please go ahead and do get those questions in. I will read some off to you now, Bob, for you to answer for the audience. So let's start with, can you explain the distribution of career awards among the social sciences? I've noticed that, at least in recent years, sociologists are incredibly unlikely to receive these. Is it because few sociologists apply? Does it have something to do with the makeup of the team of reviewers?
Okay, before I respond, by the way, this is the first time I've ever listened to myself. And now I understand why so many students would be asleep in my classes. Anyway, the answer is why SBE funds few career awards is SBE is the poorest directorate in the National Science Foundation, and careers are a minimum of 400,000. Increasingly, they are a lot more than that. So our management has made a decision that, we participate in the program, but I also, and if you go back to that slide, say you got to really walk on the water. If sociology funded a number of careers, it would have very little money left to fund anything else. Our budgets have not increased in recent years. Now times are changing, perhaps we shall see, but that's the reason. It's just lower priority. Other directorates, for example, engineering, the front office of engineering supplements or pays, that doesn't supplement, but pays part of each career award. So as a DRMS program officer, I have a set budget. Every dollar I spend on a career is a dollar I'm not spending on something else. In engineering, that's not true because half of it will be picked up by the front office. So that's the reason.
Okay. Another question. I'm in a program that does not have a PhD program. I can fund master's students, but I do not have an option for a doctoral student. I would like to hire postdoc students. What are key elements of the postdoc plan that need to be in a proposal?
Okay, the answer is, and this relates to an earlier question about how we support graduate students. Graduate students are frequently, you need to get an award, and in your proposal, support graduate students. Whether they're at the MA or PhD level is irrelevant. If the graduate student can participate and do the work, sure, we will fund them. We also fund undergraduates, either directly in the proposal, you can put money in for undergraduates if it's grunt work, but if it's not grunt work, if it's where they're going to learn how we do research and participate on that level, we have something called research experiences for undergraduates. And it's not a lot of money, and you can either put REU money in your proposal or wait until you get a proposal and then the next day send in a supplement. And the DRMS success rate for REU supplements is approximately 90%. So, you just have to say what you're going to do. We're especially delighted when you have the students involved are underrepresented minorities, although that's not necessary. The postdoc plan is, Congress told us that if we're funding a postdoc, there needs to be a postdoc mentoring plan. It's a separate document, and to be honest, I don't know what are the key elements. It's never been a major factor in a funding decision. It would sort of be like the data management plan. If it's weak and just doesn't seem to be taking it seriously, we would contact the PI and say, okay, you need to revise that plan. This is really not adequate. You need to have something that would make sense.
That's right. Something that shows you are serious about mentoring these postdocs,
Yes.
on your proposal. That's right. Okay. Let's see. Did I miss one here? I'm interested in submitting a career proposal for a Center on Deaf Visual Ethnography at Gallaudet, but it seems that these aren't getting funded. From what you're saying about, so what you're saying, should I pivot towards another program?
Okay, I'm interested in submitting a career proposal for center.
Yes.
Okay, that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what a career proposal is.
Yes.
A career proposal is a single scholar award. Yes, you can have a specialist helping on advanced statistics or something, but it's not a team. Increasingly, social scientists, we fund teams. We have so much different expertise, but a career proposal is really a single individual with 5 years and a plan as to how you're going to take what you learn and use it as in your role as an educator. A center is a team idea. So your problem isn't that you're submitting it to anthropology, I gather, but that it's it's not going to flow. They're two different things.
Okay. Could you please speak to the distinctions between the proposals that are typically funded by ECON and DRMS? I've noticed that experimental economics projects are funded in both divisions.
Okay. That's a great question. Once upon a time, DRMS was funding Danny Kahneman when econ wasn't. That econ back in a long time ago had very little respect for, we have a model, it's deductive, we don't need no data. Increasingly, we co-review. Econ definitely funds experimental stuff. That's about all I can tell you. We sometimes, like this round, we co-reviewed with econ in one particular proposal. Econ felt it really didn't have enough more traditional economics in it, and so its panel reviewed it poorly, and my panel loved it. So I mean that happens. We've evolved so that we do much more co-reviewing. I mean, if it's pure, DRMS funds empirical work, period, as well as conferences and so on and so on. But econ also funds purely theoretical work.
Okay. You mentioned about very few NSF career awards in SBE. How about the mid-career advancement grant?
Okay, this is a new program that the bio-directorate came up with, and we joined. And it's the first year of it. We meaning a number of SBE programs, not all programs. DRMS joined, and we haven't made final decisions on those. I don't know if other programs are. But it's, it was a one shot, but it will be continued next year, I'm certain, but with a revised solicitation. So take a look at what that solicitation includes. It will be similar, I suspect, to what happened this year.
I guess this one is for me. Saying this has been helpful. Is the virtual webinar a result of COVID? And if so, do you plan to continue virtual webinars post-COVID? So the answer is yes, we did transition from in-person to virtual for this conference and the previous one that was in November 2020 as a result of, the COVID and stay at home, everyone remote working and all, not traveling. So we don't know what the future holds. We don't know if we normally have the grants conference twice a year. We don't know if we will do one virtual and one in person. That's to be determined. So yes, we do see that we get a lot more people, of course, when we're doing this virtually. So hopefully these are, continue to be successful. And thank you for recognizing that it's been helpful. We appreciate that. Okay, question. I'm a university grant writer recently hired from engineering into our School of Social Work, and I'm encouraging my researchers to pursue NSF funding. However, I know there are very few social work researchers leading NSF grants. Is there a reason for this? I don't understand. Should I not be encouraging them to pursue these opportunities?
Well, I don't know if that's true that there are few social work PhDs. My program has gotten proposals from people in social work schools, and they've been funded. So, NSF funds basic research, and social workers are, I suspect, really very much into, hey, what can we do to help people, blah, blah, blah. But, there's theories of what works and what doesn't. So I'll go back to my cancer example. So I don't know if you're dealing with a I really can't answer that. But it's certainly what we look for. What I certainly look for is not where the scholar is sitting, whether it's in a business. I think people in business schools, any department you can think of, law schools. It doesn't matter where you sit. It's that what do you want to do, and does your team have the capabilities to do it? And so often, just think last year, I think we funded one that was somebody in social work and somebody in an economics department. It was about incentives for, okay. So anyway, yeah.
Okay, looking outside of SBE, where could SBE-oriented researchers consider for NSF funding, especially if collaborating across disciplines, such as working with engineers who struggle with surveys? So SBE.
Well, what? Okay. SIZE, computer information science and engineering. SIZE has, some have said, I would never say such a thing, more money than they know what to do with. But it is a well-funded directorate, and SIZE, in fact, we have, there's the SATSI program, Secure and Trusted Computing, which is joint SIZE and SBE. And SBE is, in fact, been pursuing some partnerships with SIZE. And to be honest, I think the reason is the Willie Horton reason, not Willie Horton, that's who's the bank robber? Anyway, Willie Horton's a whole other. Because that's where the money is, and SIZE is looking to improve social science components of its work. Okay. So check SIZE.
Okay, here's one
I'll give you one more. There is historically there's a program in engineering entitled Humans, Disasters, and the Built Environment. The program officer for that, he's a rotator and will be leaving, is Walt Peacock, a sociologist at Texas A&M. And that program historically has funded lots of disaster social science. So my program funds risk, but if you're doing something like disaster recovery without looking at mitigation and things like that, it's not DRMS, it would be that program. They fund, especially if it deals with the built environment in some way. One trick, again, to find out what's going on is go to the NSF web site and go to awards. And you'll find one page for every award for the last 30 years. And it'll say the amount of money, the PIs, and a couple of paragraphs on what they're doing. You can search by topic, keyword, program. You can search by social work,
Okay.
going back to it earlier, and see what you find.
Okay, here's a question that came in previously. I would love to see a broader discussion of how to better integrate food systems into proposals, understanding that much of food system studies has multiple pieces. Will there be more encouragement of these kinds of mixed method and cross-disciplinary, cross-agency partnerships in the future? Also, I think I am interested in better understanding, based on this most recent work, the degree to which NSF is interested in challenges facing local municipalities, and in particular, rural ones.
Well, okay, I remember that question. I'm glad you thought of that. This is great. It's great for a number of points. One is that my program, you're thinking, what is DRMS looking for? What's econ looking for? Sociology? And the answer is, what makes NSF different from other agencies is we don't say, gee, in my field, I want to do more on climate change communications because I think there's more that could be done and it's important. So I'm looking for that. No, we say, you tell us why what you want to do has strong intellectual merit. We're going to learn things that we don't already know that are important and significant broader impacts that you tell us. So make a case in why food security, etc. We have a SBE program, security and preparedness, political science essentially, but with food, etc. So send a one-pager to the program officer and say, look, this is what I'm thinking of doing. This is what I want to do. Tell me and here's the likely theoretical or methodological advance. Here's the literature I'm building on. Is that appropriate for your program? Now, in some ways, your question, I could have given a real snappy answer 4 years ago. NSF had a program, an interdisciplinary program called Infuse, Innovations at the Nexus of Food, Energy, and Water. Because you can't talk intelligently about food without talking about energy and water. You can't talk, you get the point. So we had an interdisciplinary competition that lasted about 5 or 6 years and has died. So, but that doesn't mean that the topic or parts of it can't make sense. So, look at programs. That the lead on that was hydrology out of the geoscience directorate, but it had a strong social science component.
Okay. All right, here's another one. What should be done to increase funding opportunities for urban social sciences and planning?
Okay, by the way, I didn't answer the one saying, are we looking for things on rural governments and so on? So the answer is, I don't look for anything. I look for you. You tell me. I mean, I funded one just 2 weeks ago on polycentric government in rural areas and environmental anyway, and putting in environmental justice concepts. So yeah, I mean, it's sure. We're not, there's no program labeled urban, but depending upon the literatures you're dealing with, I mean, we have geography in the BCS directorate. It's now human environment in geographic systems or something like that. We've changed names on programs, but it's still essentially geography. So yeah, there's new knowledge that would be useful to making wiser decisions. My program funds decisions by individuals, families, governments, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does SBE encourage principal investigators incorporating goalie into their proposals?
Goalie. Okay. Yeah. The answer is we don't care. It's kind of nice. It would have a broader impact. The problem with goalie, at least for SBE, is that I've gotten 2 goalie proposals in the last 16 years, I think. It's not like we discourage them. One problem is we have norms of sharing the results and sharing the data. And a lot of private firms don't want to share the findings or the data. That's why also we tend not to fund much in finance. First off, if you have some new finance ideas, you can get a lot more money than you can from us. And you want that to be proprietary. We're saying, look, this is taxpayer money. You've got to share your data after a reasonable period of time. But a reasonable period of time is not 50 years. I hope that helps.
Okay, looks like we have time maybe for one more. How soon on average will a proposal go out for review in SBE after being properly received by NSF?
Okay, well, I'll tell you quickly different programs handle it differently. My adventure is August 18th, proposals are due. Most people tend to send their proposals in on the 17th or 18th, just like students. I mean, you guys can't send it in, a month before. But anyway, the staff will help do a compliance check on NSF rules, font regulations, etc. Well, the computer catches a lot of that now. In the next 3 or 4 days, Claudia and I will divide them. The ones that are risk, I get. Decision theory, she'll get. And I'll start immediately sending out requests for reviews. I again recommend that you give us some names because that helps and it tells us the type of so-and-so. So normally I'll send out six letters asking people to get me those back, get me your review back in a month. And I work very, very hard that time of the year. And there's a 2-stage process. If you don't get a significant, if you don't pass the bar on the ad hoc reviews, you won't go to the panel. So it will be triaged early. You'll get the individual reviews back. Often you'll get a program officer note from Claudia or from myself. And then I'll ask 2 members, the ones that pass, sometimes then in October, I'll assign it to 2 members of the advisory panel. We have a standing panel, 2 years, staggered terms, senior people. The more junior people tend to be the ad hocs.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We would greatly appreciate it if you could complete our survey so we can get your feedback. Thank you very much again and enjoy the rest of your day.
If you have any questions, send me a note.